Chicago's Archer Avenue, shrouded in mist and shadows, has been the setting for countless legends, but none are more haunting than the story of Resurrection Mary, a ghostly figure said to appear by the roadside, dressed in white, her gaze fixed and unwavering, as if she's waiting for something, or perhaps someone. For decades, drivers and locals alike have reported strange sightings along this lonely stretch of road. A glimpse of a pale figure in the rearview mirror, a chill in the air as they pass the cemetery gates, and those who dare to stop, to offer her a ride, well, their lives are never quite the same. Tonight, we take you back to a fateful night in 1939, when a young man named Jerry Palus met her face to face. He thought he was in for an ordinary evening at a Chicago ballroom, an evening of music, dancing, and laughter. But as the night went on, Jerry's world would be turned upside down by a presence he couldn't explain, and an encounter he would never forget. Some say she's nothing more than a story, a figment of urban folklore. But what Jerry experienced that night was all too real. Was it a chance meeting with the supernatural, or a warning from beyond the grave? Tonight, we explore Jerry's chilling story, an encounter with the infamous Resurrection Mary. But before we move on, hit that subscribe button. Archer Avenue, a quiet, winding road that stretches across the south side of Chicago. To most, it's simply a pathway through town, a road to pass along the way. But to those familiar with the area's history, it's much more than that. Archer Avenue is a place where shadows linger a little longer, where the night feels colder, and where every turn holds an unsettling sense of mystery. Lined with ancient cemeteries, Archer Avenue has been shrouded in tales of the supernatural for decades. The nearby Resurrection Cemetery, with its towering gates and endless rows of gravestones, has witnessed generations of Chicagoans laying their loved ones to rest. Yet, among the countless souls buried here, one spirit, in particular, has refused to stay quiet. Her name is Mary. Locals call her Resurrection Mary, and her story has become part of the city's dark lore. It's said that she appears as a young woman, dressed in a simple, elegant white dress, her eyes distant, her expression cold. Most often, she's seen standing by the roadside on quiet nights, waiting, almost as if she's looking for someone to stop, to notice her. For over a century, drivers passing through Archer Avenue have reported sightings that are eerily similar. The stories often begin the same way. A lone figure by the side of the road, waving down a car, her face pale in the moonlight. Those brave enough to stop describe an encounter like no other, a chill in the air, an unnatural quiet, and an overwhelming sense that they're in the presence of something otherworldly. But it doesn't end there. According to local lore, once Resurrection Mary gets into the car, her silence and coldness grow more intense, unsettling the driver until they reach Resurrection Cemetery. And just as they turn to say goodbye or offer one last glance, she's gone. No open door, no footsteps, just an empty seat and the chilling memory of her presence lingering in the air. For decades, the legend of Resurrection Mary has haunted Chicago, with countless tales of encounters passed down through families, retold by locals who swear by their authenticity. They all agree on one thing. She's not just a story. She's a restless spirit, caught between worlds, bound to Archer Avenue and Resurrection Cemetery. But what happened to her? And why does she remain here, haunting these dark roads, appearing to those who dare to look? To understand, we go back to the night of 1939, when a young man named Jerry Palus came face to face with Mary. An encounter that would become one of the most chilling tales in Chicago's history. It was 1939, and Chicago was alive with the music and nightlife of a city determined to forget its troubles, even if only for an evening. Among those looking to unwind was a young man named Jerry Palus, a spirited Chicagoan who loved dancing and the thrill of a night out. Like many of his generation, he found escape in the rhythm of jazz and swing, in the smoky glow of a ballroom, where the night stretched out like a promise. That night, Jerry stepped through the doors of the Liberty Grove and Hall Ballroom, a popular spot on the city's southwest side. The ballroom was bustling, alive with laughter, music, and the swirl of dancers moving in sync with the jazz band. Couples spun across the floor, friends shared drinks, and for Jerry, it was just another evening filled with the joys of youth and the lively beat of swing. The Liberty Grove was a place of warmth and light, its polished dance floor and dim, intimate corners an oasis from the cold streets outside. Jerry was looking forward to an ordinary night of dancing, a few laughs, and the chance to forget the world beyond those doors. He had no idea that before the night was over, he would meet someone who would change his life forever. Someone who wasn't quite like anyone else in that crowded room. Inside the Liberty Grove and Hall Ballroom, the energy was electric. Laughter, the clink of glasses, and the lively notes of jazz filled the air, wrapping the room in a warm, comforting glow. The lights cast a soft haze over the dance floor, where couples swayed and spun, lost in the music. For most people there, it was just another night, a chance to escape into the rhythm and leave their troubles behind. But for Jerry Palus, something, or rather someone, would make this night unforgettable. As Jerry made his way through the bustling crowd, his eye was drawn to a figure standing alone near the edge of the dance floor. She was pale, almost luminous in the dim light, her white dress catching the faint glow as if it were made of moonlight itself. Her hair was blonde and softly curled, framing a face that looked both delicate and distant, as though she were lost in her own world. There was a stillness about her that contrasted with the energy around them, a quiet calm that seemed to cloak her in mystery. While everyone else laughed and moved with ease, she stood perfectly still, watching the dancers with a gaze that seemed to reach far beyond the ballroom walls. Jerry couldn't shake the feeling that there was something unusual about her. She looked young, her features smooth and almost doll-like. Yet her eyes held a sadness, a kind of timelessness, that sent a shiver through him. He watched her for a moment, trying to place what felt so out of place about her. Was it the way she stood, so detached from the crowd? Or was it her expression, calm, serene, yet somehow weighed down by a sorrow he couldn't understand? Whatever it was, Jerry felt a strange pull, an urge to be near her that he couldn't explain. Gathering his courage, he approached her. As he got closer, he noticed details he hadn't seen before. Her skin was pale, almost too pale, as if she hadn't been touched by sunlight in a long time. Her gaze was fixed, distant, and her presence seemed to cast a coldness around her, a chill that cut through the warmth of the crowded room. With his heart pounding, he asked if she would like to dance. For a moment, she didn't respond, her gaze slipping past him as though she hadn't heard. But then, slowly, she turned her eyes toward him. Her expression didn't change, and yet, as she looked at him, he felt an odd sense of acceptance, as if she had been waiting for him. Without a word, she placed her hand in his, and he felt a shock of cold race through his body. Her hand was icy, delicate, as if he were holding something that wasn't fully real. But the touch was enough to anchor him, to assure him that she was there, in his grasp. As they moved onto the dance floor, the rest of the room seemed to fade away. Jerry couldn't hear the laughter, the music, or the clinking of glasses anymore. All he could see, all he could feel, was her presence. And though they were surrounded by people, it felt as though they were the only two souls in the room. She moved with a grace that was both haunting and beautiful, her steps light, almost as though she were floating. And as they danced, Jerry felt a creeping sense of dread, a feeling that he had stepped into something far beyond his understanding. He looked into her eyes, hoping to catch a glimpse of warmth, of something familiar. But her gaze was empty, her expression still distant, almost as if she weren't really there. And as they danced, Jerry found himself wondering who, or what, he was holding in his arms. With each step, Jerry felt an unnatural chill spreading from her hand to his, the kind of cold that seeped deep into the bones. Her hand was delicate and ice-cold, a touch so light it was as though she might slip away at any moment. Yet she moved effortlessly, gliding across the floor in perfect rhythm, her eyes never fully meeting his, but staring just over his shoulder, her expression distant, almost haunted. Every question Jerry wanted to ask, where was she from? Why was she alone? Seemed to hang unspoken in the air. When he finally managed to speak, to ask her something as simple as her name, her voice was barely more than a whisper. "Mary," she replied, her tone flat, almost detached. Her answers were short, her voice soft and distant, as though she were speaking from far away, or perhaps from someplace beyond. As they danced, Jerry couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The laughter and music around them felt muffled, strange, as if he were hearing it through water. His heart beat faster, a sense of unease growing with each passing moment. Mary's movements were graceful, yet there was a weight to her presence, a heaviness that contrasted with her delicate appearance. She seemed both there and not there, a figure caught between worlds. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she looked up at him, her gaze piercing, her eyes reflecting a sadness he couldn't understand. For a brief moment, Jerry felt as if he could see straight into her, as if her very soul were laid bare before him. A soul marked by sorrow, loneliness, perhaps even something darker. But before he could process what he was feeling, the music came to a stop. The spell was broken, the noise of the ballroom rushing back to fill the silence. Mary released his hand, her touch lingering for just a moment longer than it should have, a final, chilling reminder of the strange, silent dance they had shared. And then she whispered, almost to herself, "I have to go." Jerry didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to stop her, to ask her more, but the chill of her touch still clung to him, a warning he couldn't ignore. With a strange sense of reluctance, he offered her a ride, a simple gesture of kindness, and the beginning of a journey he would never forget. They stepped outside together, leaving the warmth and liveliness of the Liberty Grove and Hall ballroom behind. The night air was cool, the city quiet, as if holding its breath. The street was deserted, save for a few scattered streetlights, casting dim pools of light onto the empty sidewalk. Jerry couldn't shake the odd feeling in his chest, an unexplainable tension that seemed to grow with each step they took toward his car. He opened the passenger door, watching as Mary slipped into the seat, her movements slow and graceful, almost too smooth. She settled into place, her gaze fixed straight ahead, her expression unreadable. Jerry climbed in beside her, started the engine, and the car hummed to life, breaking the silence of the night. As they pulled onto Archer Avenue, he felt a chill settle over them, an unnatural coldness that crept through the car despite the warmth of the engine. Jerry tried to break the silence, tossing out a few friendly questions, but Mary offered little more than a nod or a soft word in response. Her voice was faint, almost a murmur, and there was no warmth in it, only a quiet detachment. Each time he glanced her way, he found her staring straight ahead, her eyes fixed on the dark road in front of them, as though she were looking far beyond the trees and streetlights that lined the avenue. The night felt heavy, the shadows along Archer Avenue stretching long and deep. The road was empty, silent, and the deeper they drove, the more the chill seemed to intensify, settling into his bones. It was a coldness that felt unnatural, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the ballroom they'd just left. Jerry noticed his breath fogging up the glass, each exhale visible in the dim light. He stole glances at Mary, hoping for some sign, something familiar or comforting. But her face remained expressionless, her hands resting still in her lap, and her skin pale against the dark fabric of the car seat. Her silence was more than quiet. It was an emptiness, an absence that made him feel as though he were alone, despite her presence beside him. Finally, as they approached a darker, narrow stretch of Archer Avenue, Mary spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper as she turned to him and said, "Turn here." Jerry's heart pounded, and he nodded, following her request without a word. He took the turn, guiding the car down a quiet, winding road that led toward Resurrection Cemetery. He could feel the tension building in the air, a strange heaviness that pressed down on him as they drew closer. He didn't know what to expect, but his nerves were on edge, a quiet dread creeping over him. As the cemetery gates came into view, Mary spoke once more, her words soft and tinged with sadness. "This is where I need to be." Jerry slowed the car, pulling over near the iron gates of Resurrection Cemetery. He turned to ask if she was certain, if there was anything else she needed, but the words caught in his throat. The passenger seat beside him was empty. Mary was gone. He looked around, heart pounding, searching the dark road, the silent cemetery, for any sign of her. The door hadn't opened, and there was no sound, no movement, just the empty seat and the cold, lingering chill of her presence. For a long moment, he sat there, frozen, staring into the darkness. In that moment, the realization washed over him. Mary wasn't just a stranger he had met at the ballroom. She was something else, something beyond the living. And as Jerry sat there, alone on the deserted road, he knew he had encountered the spirit of Resurrection Mary, a memory that would haunt him for the rest of his life. For a long, silent moment, Jerry sat frozen in his seat, staring at the empty space beside him, where Mary had been just seconds before. The passenger door was still closed, the night around him still and silent, yet the seat was empty. She was gone, as if she had never been there at all. A chill gripped his heart, one far colder than the air that filled the car. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he had just seen, trying to rationalize something that defied all logic. Had he imagined it? Had she slipped out of the car without him noticing? But deep down, he knew the truth. There was no way she could have left. He would have heard the door, would have seen her step out into the darkness. As the realization dawned on him, a wave of dread swept over him, settling in his bones, heavy and unshakable. He had danced with a ghost, the girl in white, the one who had felt so real, so tangible in his arms. She wasn't of this world. Every strange detail, every unnatural chill, every distant gaze she had cast, it all made sense now in a horrifying way he could barely process. Jerry gripped the steering wheel, his hands shaking, feeling as though he had stepped into a nightmare from which there was no escape. He glanced toward the iron gates of Resurrection Cemetery, looming in the dark, silent and unyielding. Somewhere out there, lost among the gravestones, was the girl he had met, the girl who had vanished without a trace, leaving only a lingering chill and the haunting memory of her presence. His heart pounded as he remembered her final words, her soft voice asking him to take her here, to this very place. The cemetery. She had known, hadn't she? She had known all along that this was where she belonged, and he had been nothing more than a passenger on her journey back to the grave. In the stillness of that dark road, Jerry felt utterly alone, as if the weight of her spirit pressed down on him, binding him to this memory he would never shake. His mind reeled, grappling with a truth he could barely comprehend. He had met Chicago's most famous ghost, Resurrection Mary, face to face, and she had left him with an encounter that would haunt him for the rest of his life. If you're enjoying this, and brave enough to hear more ghostly tales like this one, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Jerry wasn't the first to see her, and he wouldn't be the last. His story spread quickly, passed from person to person, each retelling adding another layer to the mystery of Resurrection Mary. And soon, his chilling encounter became part of the local lore, just one of many tales of an apparition haunting Archer Avenue. Since Jerry's nightmarish drive, dozens of others have come forward with stories that mirror his in strange and unsettling ways. Drivers claim they've seen her standing by the roadside in the dead of night, dressed in that same white dress, her eyes distant and her face expressionless. Some even say she waves them down, only to disappear as they pass by. For years, cab drivers, night shift workers, and curious locals alike have shared stories of picking up a young woman in white, only for her to vanish without a trace when they near Resurrection Cemetery. The stories echo Jerry's experience, each one eerily similar. Always a girl in white, always the same chilling silence, and always she disappears without a word, leaving behind only the memory of her cold, ghostly presence. Then there are those who say they've seen her walking straight into the cemetery itself. Witnesses describe watching a figure glide through the cemetery gates and drift among the headstones before fading into the night, as though she were returning home to a place she can't seem to leave. Over the decades, the legend of Resurrection Mary has grown into one of Chicago's most famous ghost stories, capturing the imaginations of those brave enough to listen and haunting the memories of those unlucky enough to meet her. Today, her spirit is as much a part of Archer Avenue as the road itself, a ghostly reminder of a story that, for many, is far more than just a tale. To this day, Resurrection Mary remains Chicago's most famous ghost, a story passed down through generations, a restless soul who continues to haunt Archer Avenue, her presence felt by those brave enough to drive its lonely stretch after dark. Is she real? Or is she just a tale that grew out of shadows and whispers? No one can say for sure, but the stories keep coming, and for every person who claims to have seen her, there's another who warns others to stay away, to let her be. So, the next time you find yourself alone on Archer Avenue, passing Resurrection Cemetery, keep your eyes on the road and think twice before you stop. Mary may still be waiting, searching for that one ride home. And if you enjoyed this journey into Chicago's ghostly lore, make sure to follow our page. After all, there's plenty more to discover in the world of the unknown, and trust us, we won't vanish on you.